Hi, everyone. My name is Mihir Wanchoo, and joining me today on the Fantasy Book Critic video podcast is a very, very, very special guest. He has been an author whom I first discovered in early 2013. Since then, he has released a lot of books. I will seriously count them all towards the end, but there's like at least 15 to 16 to 17 books. Even he doesn't know.
18!
18. There we go.
18!
18 books. He has been a very, very, very voracious reader, but at the same time, he has been an excellent writer, writing in different genres, so to speak. And today we have focused on his War Eternal series. So joining me today is my good friend, hopefully I count him as a good friend, Rob J. Hayes. Hi, Rob. How are you doing today?
Hello! I'm doing all right, thank you. I'm just about over my cold, so, I can speak again.
Yay.
However, you may have to accept the fact that I cough occasionally.
That's absolutely okay. You're coughing in your room. I'll be over here. We're all safe. So it's all
Digital
good.
virus.
If it helps, me and the entire family just got over a nasty flu virus as well. So it's everywhere. It's literally everywhere. And it's not COVID. So maybe small mercies for that.
Oh, I know. Tell me about it. Like 2 days ago, I was like, I'm feeling really, really bad. I'm just going to take a COVID test just in case. Luckily, not COVID, just an, everyday standard cold.
Yep.
Yay.
And
It still exists.
the other viruses, not the coronavirus, but the coryza virus, which was, the virus which was present all along. But nevertheless, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so glad I was able to meet you earlier this year after bothering you and bugging you over Facebook Messenger or emails.
Yeah.
all along for the last.
Barely a week goes by when Mihir's not popping up in my messengers going, not to bother you, but hello.
Yes. Well, you write so many fantastic books. There's only so much I can do to not bother you when I have questions or when I'm asking you for the next book or something like that. And it's not just one series. You have multiple series, so you have only yourself to blame, sir.
I do. And to be honest, I never mind when people contact me anyway, so don't worry about it.
So today we are I'm hoping to talk to you about your War Eternal series. It is your first series that, you have completed over the span of your career. Not that that's a bad thing, but yes, that's beating hard. You have also revealed the hardcover, I should say, the hardcover to Sins of the Mother yesterday, and today you revealed the hardcover edition cover reveal on Patrick's blog for That's Beating Hard. The cover which you just showed was the paperback cover, and I have these wonderful covers, which is Along the Razor's Edge, which is done by Felix Ortiz, and yes, there we go. And this hardcore design is done by Sean T. King. Then we have The Lessons Never Learned, which is gorgeous in white. Yes. And then we have From Cold Ashes Risen, which is perhaps my favorite so far amongst all three. I gotta ask you about these gorgeous covers first. You not only went all out, you have been a solid proponent of utilizing Felix's amazing skills, but also Sean's amazing skills to get these, covers. You have the covers right behind you as well, which I think are the paperback covers for From Cold Ashes Risen, and That's Beating Heart right behind you. Can you talk about, the artwork, a little bit more about the artwork, like what made you go to Felix? How do you talk to him? How do you get him to do what he does? And then also about these hard conditions.
I mean, I always wanted to go to Felix. Like since I first worked with him on Never Die, and I absolutely love the way that he works. He's such an amazing artist, and also I find working with him so incredibly easy, basically. So from the moment started working with him Never Die, I knew that I wanted to work with him on the War Eternal too, and I thought perfect person to bring Eska to life. But as for working with Felix, it's absolute joy. He's so easy to work with. I don't know how most people work with Felix, but I tend to just be like, hey, here's a bunch of crazy ideas and here's a character, and he's like, cool, I'll get back to you. And then he usually, like, even if I try to send him I think I want this particular type of cover and this, and he'll usually sort of like go, well, here's a mock-up of this, but here's something else I did, and I'm just like, yeah, no, go with that one. So it's I love working with them for the simple fact that it's like giving a horse their head, isn't it, their reins, and letting them go, which is pretty much how I work with with Felix, and with Sean to do the typography as well. I mean, Sean's been doing my books forever now.
Yeah. Yep. Since the second covers for the Ties That Bind trilogy,
Yeah,
he has been doing the typography and design for them. So technically, he's preceded Felix in that regard.
yeah. I mean, other than the very first time I ever self-published, with that was basically me and my dad did the entire typography on a bootleg copy of Photoshop. I've been working with Sean, so I never worked with anybody else as far as typography is concerned. And luckily, he and Felix have an amazing working relationship. I mean, the list of covers those two have to their names goes so long at this point, and they never fail. They're perfect. Such a good duo. So yeah, that was basically it's very easy to work with both Sean and Felix. I tell Felix roughly what I want, and he comes up with something completely different, but looks so much better than what I thought. And then it goes to Sean, and Sean just does Sean things. He's amazing. He's a wizard. And then I just sit there and go, "It's brilliant. Here, can I pay you yet?" That's usually about the extent of my involvement in the covers.
Brilliant decision to get involved with these two geniuses and just let them do their own work. So that's really brilliant. I do have to ask you about these hardcover editions as well, because this is the first time I believe that you have done different editions or different artwork, I mean, different covers for the hardcover as well as for the trade paperback or paperback covers. These also look gorgeous in white, and I know that when you stack them up like this, they're just brilliantly looking, even from the sides, the spines, everything. Can you talk about these all white editions a bit? Because I don't think there have, on the traditionally published side, there's been very few editions like this, but on the self-published side, nada.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of doing sort of different covers for hardbacks as with paperbacks and the like, I think it's an idea that's definitely starting to gain traction. You're seeing it a lot more with places like Broken Binding and Illumicrate and all of those like sites popping up that are doing these sort of special editions. And I had the idea of it for like a couple of years now, that I wanted to do a hardback version of Eska's books, but I didn't want it to just be like, hey, here's the same stuff. It's a hardback version. I wanted to do something a bit special. So I wanted to get some new artwork done for it, and sort of like make it a bit fancier inside, just an all-round more quality product. And I do love the sort of like that minimalistic whitish design that you get on a lot of books. Like I remember seeing them on the Faithful and the Fallen, John Gwynn's books like Malice and Wrath, Ruin and Valor. I've got them all on my shelf. And they're gorgeous. They're minimalistic. They're mostly white. There's a sword. There's a little sort of like, hey, there might be a battle in the background. That's pretty much it. And I just fell in love with them. I think they're absolutely gorgeous. And the same with the Poppy War books by R.F. Kuang. I probably murdered the pronunciation. I'm very sorry. But I absolutely love the sort of like the original of those covers, where it's just like a character in a swirl of smoke, and mostly white, and yeah, absolutely gorgeous, basically. So I had the idea that I'd really like that sort of quite minimalistic design. And I tell you what, I've got another picture to show. The artwork, but the idea behind the artwork for those particular covers came from a very early concept for the first book. So this is the final cover, standard cover for the first book, Along the Razor's Edge. But before we settled on this, we went through a bunch of different styles of cover, and one of the ones we went through, I have here. Hang on, there we go. Which I lovingly call Eska in Red. And I just fell in love with it. We decided it wasn't right for the book, for the theme of the book. We wanted to go with a more sort of like traditionally more epic fantasy style cover, and that was a bit too off the wall, I guess. But I never stopped loving that piece of artwork that Felix did for me. So much so I got that made of it, and I have a bookmark with it, and a play mat for playing card games with it. I just love the piece of artwork. So when it came time to do the special editions, I basically went to Felix and went, look, I want 5 pieces of artwork like this to go on the hardcovers. And he went, yeah, I think I can do that. I think he quite liked the fact that it was a challenge, because it's a very different style to his usual style of artwork. I mean, the stuff that you quite often see from Felix is more like, there we go. There we go. I have no coordination in reverse at all. It's more like this the Despot and Heart thing, where it's like, you know, there may be 1 or 2 characters, and then there's like a lot of action going on. So having this sort of very different style of a single character in grungy brushstrokes, it was very different for him, I think, and I think he really enjoyed. I hope he really enjoyed coming up with the 5 pieces of artwork for it. So yeah, that's how they came about.
That's a fascinating story, and let me just say that bookmark which that the red and Eska and red which you showed, I know the bookmark which you're referring to. It is, yes, that one. It is, amongst reviewers, I've seen many people who want to buy that bookmark from you because it is so gorgeous. It is so gorgeous. It's and I'm glad
bookmark as well.
I'm glad you went with these. Does this mean that maybe in the future you might consider doing them for other series of yours as well?
I definitely do want to do hardcover versions of, you know, most of my books, if not all my books. And I'd like to do sort of like these sorts of more special edition type things. I can say there is going to be a special edition of Never Die coming. And I will probably be doing a standard hardback edition of that as well eventually. But yes, there will be a special edition coming soon. It's going to be very fancy.
Ooh.
And that's all I can say about it for now. But yeah, eventually I would like to get or most of, if not all, my books done in this sort of like special edition hardback type thing. And seeing as how, you know, the Ties That Bind trilogy is 10 years old next year, who knows? We'll see.
Fingers crossed. For those who might be wondering, or if you haven't read The Ties That Bind, The Ties That Bind is Rob's debut trilogy. He self-published that in 2013. They got a couple of free covers, and they are still there now. It is part of the First Earth saga. You'll see that, you know, if you look it up on Amazon or on Goodreads, it's part of 6 books, but there are 3 series in that. There is The Ties That Bind, which is the opening trilogy. There is The Best Laid Plans, which is the, you know, Joe Abercrombie meets, you know, pirates grimdark.
Pirate Crombie, I believe it's been termed.
What, sorry? Pirate? Oh yes, Pirate Crombie.
Pirate Crombie.
Pirate Crombie. That's a good one. Also, the first book of which won the SPFPO 3rd edition in 2017. So kudos to you, Rob, on that. And then there's a standalone as well, which I believe is City of Kings, which has, if I'm not wrong, a Sean King original cover.
It does. I don't have a copy of it anywhere near, but yes, it has a it's a black rose that's bleeding in a winter sort of setting, which is completely Sean King original. Nobody else did the artwork. It was all Sean King, it's an absolutely glorious piece of artwork. I'm still not entirely certain it works as a fantasy book cover, but I love the artwork.
It is gorgeous because it's like when you zoom in, you can kind of see within the black rose, within the blood that's dripping. It's dark blood. It's a very thematic and a literal cover because it deals with the themes of the book. So, and of course, that book is possibly one of the best grimdark books I've ever read. And of course, the ending, which is very brutal. And especially after what you did at the end of The Ties That Bind, it broke me even further. So. Again, but that is a talk. That is maybe a talk for the next year when you might be doing, you know, 10th anniversary special somethings for that world. So we'll hold on for that. But I do want to talk about the War Eternal books. If I'm not wrong, I believe you started writing them in 2016.
Yeah.
They were very different from what came before. Can you maybe perhaps talk to us about like how the character of Eskara in this world developed in your mind?
Yeah. I think I had the idea of them about midway through 2016, and I really wanted a sort of a world with magic that revolved around the use of these sources, basically. And it was just sort of like, I think that was where it mostly came from. It sort of like it birthed from the magic system, and I really wanted this idea of pyromancy comes from a pyromancy source, and hydromancy from a hydromancy source, and so forth. And then what magic a sorcerer could use was determined entirely on which sources they could basically use. And I think it was about halfway through 2016 when the idea came to me, and I just started building bits and pieces in my head before a character even came to me. I was like, okay, magic system, blah blah blah, and then, you know, the gods, the Rand and the Jinn, and how they interact. And I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but there's a whole thing about how they are the same and not. And then I think it was towards the end of 2016 where I decided, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to start writing this thing. And I wrote the first 3 chapters with this. And Eska wasn't really there at the time. I had no idea about Eska at the time. I just wrote down, I thought, I'm going to write, I'm going to see what character just leaps out the page at me, basically. And that was at the start of Eska. She was called something else completely at the time. I can't even remember what she was originally called. I had some random other name that was just a placeholder. So yeah, I wrote the first 3 chapters and I sent it to my alpha readers, one of which is you. You're on that side. And funnily enough, all my alpha readers came back and just went, she's so powerful a voice, yes, write this. So I did, basically. And yeah, I sat down and I wrote Along the Razor's Edge. It didn't take me very long at all, to be honest. Eska just kind of flew off the page. Yeah, I wanted the underground setting is another thing that I definitely wanted. Even before anything else, I wanted to do a book that was set entirely underground. It's actually quite funny. I had this idea of just having a book entirely set underground, so I wrote it, and then about 3 months after I finished it and put it down, Graham Austin King released Faithless, which is a book set entirely underground. I was like, son of a bitch. It quite often happens that way. But yeah, and Eska was just, she just appeared to me, basically. She just leapt off the page, or leapt out of my head into the page, and then off the page back at me, which is a very Eska thing to do. She's just, I never really set out to create this sort of like such a powerful character, I don't think. But the moment I started writing her, she very much became a sort of a funnel for a lot of the characteristics that maybe I sort of like see in myself and others that I wanted to put into a character, basically. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of real people in Eska, probably more than any of my other characters. There's probably more of me in Eska than any of my other characters as well. So a little bit worrying, but there we go.
Thank you for sharing that. And of course, it's really, I like that you mentioned this, like, that Eska was named something else, but of course, nobody remembers, including you. And that's okay, because Eskara Helstein, as she's known, or Eska, as she likes to refer to herself and others do, she is quite a powerful character. I do want to talk about the first book, especially because it is, besides the fact that, Graham Austin came out with Faithless, there almost are no subterranean set fantasy books. And the first one, you barely give a hint. I mean, you give small hints about what's happening or what has happened before, but then the entirety of the book is this claustrophobic feeling, which all the characters are experiencing, including Eska, because this is a first-person POV book. You get her unfiltered opinions, and she is raw, she's mad, she's angry, she's everything all boiled up in one. You have never written a character like this before. Did it? And you mentioned that it was very easy for you, but was it easy to get out of her headset afterwards? Or, was it easy to get in, but not getting out was a little bit difficult?
No, she's a weird one. So when she appeared to me, it was very much just this sort of like, yeah, she just leapt onto the page. But after putting her down for a while and then picking her back up again, like it was difficult. It's difficult to get back into her headset, her mindset. Getting out of it, not so much, to be honest. Although she's such a sort of like, she's so strong in the head, always has been since, you know, she came out that way. There's always been certain, like, I think of a line basically as sort of like a bit of dialogue or a bit of monologue or something like that, and it was just go, oh my god, that's just so Eska. So I have like bits of paper all around my office and notepads and everything that were just like random lines just jotted down, which were just like, yeah, this is just completely Eska. Even if I didn't particularly have a book for them or a bit for them at the time, they were just like, yeah. But getting back into her head after I've been out of it for a while, that was difficult. She deals with a lot of things like depression and anxiety. And I think that's where a lot of what I put into her from my own personal perspective. So there's no sort of like, there's no spoilers in this. She deals with anxiety, she deals with depression, she deals with thoughts of suicide quite a lot. So getting back into that mindset of having to deal with that so closely has always been quite tough, basically. I kind of found that between every single book. So when I finished book one, I put her down for about a month, and then I picked up and started book two, and I don't think I found her voice straight away again. I've said it quite a few times. Book two was a mess the first time I wrote it, and I just don't think I'd found her mindset at all, especially with a lot of things that were going on in my personal life as well. And she'd become this sort of like passive character, which was just never her. So yeah, the first time I wrote book two, I basically trashed the entire book because it was crap, and then started again. But then eventually I did manage to find her voice again. And the second time with book two was a hell of a lot easier. And then with book three, I just rolled straight into it. So I never had a break to lose her voice in that fashion. But then there were a couple of years between finishing book three and writing book four. And yeah, that was definitely, it was quite difficult to get back into her mindset, but also not, because she changes a lot between book three and book four. There's, you know, a good few years pass between the end of book three and the start of book four, basically. So she's quite a bit older, and I got to change her voice in some more subtle ways. So yeah, in general, getting back into her voice has always been quite difficult for me after I've got out of it. But it's the sort of thing that's like, well, if you keep plugging away at it and you keep trying to find that voice, eventually you will find it again, because it's still in there. You know, I haven't lost it. I haven't lost the memories and everything that went into Eska to begin with. So the voice has always been there, but it can be tough to find it again. But then trial and error is usually a good way to do it, and I think that's how most authors probably work. You know, if they feel like they've lost it, well, you just go, okay, well, I'll keep writing. Yeah, that's crap. I'll scrap that bit. I'll try again. So it certainly seemed to work out that way, at least in the end.
No, that was very informative. And what I want to say is, especially, I remember when you gave us, like when you sent us the first book, I read the first book. Eska was a very hard pill to swallow, literally. I mean, besides what all the swallowing that she did, you know, with the sources. But I remember distinctly remembering, like, the first book, she wasn't a character that was hard to, I mean, you could empathize with her situation, but she was still a hard character to maybe bond with, so to speak, because you have written dark books. You know, it's not that you wrote like cozy fantasy before and then you suddenly all of a sudden you wrote this grim dark book. This book is not as grim dark as what came before. Like, you've written First Earth, where you wrote some really bastardly characters, but they had charisma. Eska, on the other hand, had a different sort of charisma, and she was very hard to maybe form a bond with. Now, what has the reader feedback been for you? Like, you know, because I'm definitely sure you must have gotten a lot of feedback one way or the other with regards to Eskara and the first book. How was the reader feedback with regards to her character? And just for the first book, we'll talk about the second two books a little bit later.
Yeah, well, I mean, Eska is a very abrasive character.
Mhm.
And she's a character who doesn't take shit, but she also doesn't take shit from herself. She's very self-critical. You know, because the entire book is told from a sort of an older character looking back at her life. She's retelling her life story, basically. So it gives the option of, okay, so she's telling you what she did when she was a teenager, and she'll be the first person to sit there and say, I was a fucking idiot. And I think that was a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, because a lot of people, they want to connect to a character in a way that, okay, this character, I can see myself with them going through this story. They don't want that character to be constantly belittled by themselves, I think. So I think a lot of people, yeah, they struggled with it. And I mean, book one has had a very mixed reception. I think that's partly why, the fact that, yeah, she is very self-critical, she is very abrasive, and she doesn't really take any prisoners. But then there's been a lot of people who really connected with that as well. So, like, you know, she's Marmite. You either love her or hate her. Yeah, so feedback has been polarized, I think, for most part. You always get like a whole range of things, but it's mostly fallen into people saying, I loved Eska, or I hated Eska. So there's been some useful bits of feedback in that, and there's been some just what can I do with that sort of feedback. Luckily, I think one of the biggest piece of feedbacks I did get, which was quite all around, as everybody was like, she's incredibly foul-mouthed, and I was like, yeah, you might be right. So I slowly toned her down as the series went on, so she's slightly less foul-mouthed as the books go on.
Still a lot though in book one. But she's also a teenager in book one, if I'm not wrong, right?
She's 15, 16 years old in book one. So, you know, she's meant to be a mess of hormones and a bratty little arsehole, because most 15-year-olds are.
She is, and again, to be fair to her, she's put in an incredibly stressful situation, because she and Joseph are the last two sorcerers of the Oran Empire, who are basically imprisoned and thrown into the hole, as they call it, like, you know, just basically miles down into the earth. They're just having to extract rock for no apparent reason. Of course, they're kept there for a reason, and then she's been psychologically tortured as well. You know, so there's like a whole I mean, she is an arsehole, she's an asshole, but there's reasons for her being aggravated as well. What I loved about this, and just I'm going to switch a little bit from Eska the character to the world building for a little bit, because you did something very unique in this. In book one, Along the Research Edge, while, like, as I said before, you get snippets of the wider world, but the entire world is collapsed and it's entirely set within, you know, the underground. And of course, because Eska doesn't know as much, so the reader is kind of kept blinded as well. And then you kind of slowly give these small snippets and drips of information. And then, of course, not to spoil something, but there is someone or something that Eskara meets, and for the viewers, I'm not spoiling it, but you can see it on the cover. And then from there onwards, things just keep on, you know, going on and on and on and on till the wild ending. Was this on purpose, Rob? Like, did you purposefully withhold information throughout the first book? Because usually most first fantasy books, they kind of give you a broad sense of the world. Yours was the exact opposite, more Malazan than Malazan, perhaps.
It was entirely on purpose. But there's a few reasons. I wanted it to be very much focused on the pit, this underground prison. I wanted the book to feel claustrophobic, cramped underground. And I wanted it to feel like Eska was so incredibly focused on one thing: get out. Because at this point, you know, the book literally starts. The prologue of the book is literally the last battle of the war, and Eska's on the losing side. She gets captured, sent to prison. So, you know, the first chapter is her in prison, and, you know, obviously from that moment on, a major focus of her life is, I just want to get out of prison. So in that sense, it didn't really leave a lot for extraneous sort of world building, and I didn't want to do massive info dumps or anything to try and like get across that. So yeah, I added in snippets. Partly, there's flashbacks. I know a lot of people don't like flashbacks, but so there's a few flashbacks of her earlier life training in the Academy of Magic, and then there's hints at the future where she'll continuously just sort of like drop a little thing, like early on in the book she mentions that her second daughter Cyrillith is known as the Monster. She never explains why. Well, not until it happens later on. But anyway, so there's little hints like that that help to build the world around it. But I very much wanted book one to be focused around this sort of like, this is Eska. She is trapped in a prison, and she just wants to get out, and that's all there is for her. So it was very much on purpose that it is that focused, and as the books go on, it definitely expands. The whole world blows open, and she gets to explore a lot more of it. But yeah, the focus on that first book was very much on purpose.
And thank you for mentioning that about books 2 and 3, because books 2 and 3 come along, and this will be mildly spoilers, because of course the first 3 books are at least out at least close to 3 years from now. So we're not going to speak about the entire plot, but there will be some spoilers because it's present in the book blurb as well. Eska, of course, does make it out of the subterranean prison, and then from book 2 onwards and book 3 onwards, you really do a deep dive into the world. You have floating cities. You have these 2 types of entities called the Ran and the Jinn. Readers and viewers will have to read to find out what they are exactly. This book kind of goes more high fantasy than perhaps any other book that you've written so far. Again, was that on purpose? And maybe can you explain a little bit about that? Like, how did you differentiate in your mind between the epic fantasy aspect of the books that you've written and how this book really went into the epic high fantasy mode, so as to speak?
Yeah, I mean, they were always meant to be high fantasy. It's a very weird way of doing it, because I really wanted to write a high fantasy series with multiple different races and big magic and all that lot. And then I was like, but I'm going to set the first book entirely in an underground prison where there's very little magic because it's all been taken away from them. I don't know. That's a weird way to do it, but that's how I decided to do it for some reason. But yeah, no, I've like my debut series, The Ties That Bind, it was very much low fantasy. There is magic, there are demons, there are some other sort of races like trolls and the like, but for the most part, there's not a lot of magic going on. It's this low fantasy idea of it's almost like a Western, but without guns. Well, there are some guns anyway, but definite low fantasy. And I wanted to do something very different. I wanted this high fantasy thing of a sense of mystery and exploration and big badass magics that are beyond most people and all of that lot, and no dragons, because dragons have just been done to death, but everything else. So when I wanted to do that, I set about building the world with these things in, and I knew that when book 2 and book 3 came around, Eska would have access to them. She'd have the ability to go and explore them and meet these other races and have big magic and all sorts. So yeah, very much a intentional thing. As for balancing them with the sort of like the epic fantasy, I don't really know. I think that was just kind of natural. Epic and high fantasy, I feel, just go together really well, to be honest. I mean, it's been done so many different times in so many different ways that they fit really well. I think when you have some like big high fantasy, it kind of brings epic along for the ride almost. Because when you've got that sort of scale of things going on, it just starts to feel epic no matter what else you're doing, basically.
Yeah.
So I can't say I ever really set out making it with the idea of making them epic fantasy, but I definitely wanted them to be high fantasy.
They are, because you have 2 moons, they have crashed into each other. You have a giant eye in the sky, which can only be seen from like one part of the world, which is set in the desert. You have these you have the Forest of the Ten, where 10 weapons have fallen down, and these are like these astral weapons, which they don't really grant the people superpowers, but they almost make them invincible, so as to speak. And there's aspects like these because you have these different races as well. And you mentioned mystery. Yes, there's a lot of mystery, but there's also grandeur, because there's that city, which kind of the city of Roshan, which kind of rotates all around the world, so people can see it passing by. There's the city of Doshan, which is stuck supposedly, but of course nobody can get into it to see what truly is there into it. Each of those books kind of expanded the world, and of course you've got like this huge aspects of it. There's battles as well, and of course Eskara as a character also seems to grow up as well, because you can see that in the books. Here in book 1, she's kind of like a young girl. In book 2, she is, which is the lessons are learned, she kind of seems like a young warrior. And of course in book 3, she kind of ascends to a different form altogether. And you can see, behind to Rob's left as well, Eskara with her lantern.
Yeah, the growing up thing was very much intentional. I had this idea from the get-go that each book would almost be like a different decade of her life. So book 1 would be her teen years, book 2, book 1 would be her teen years, and she's very angry and kind of unsure of herself, but also has the arrogance of youth about her, where you see it in teenagers all the time. There's a lot of bravado there. They're certain they know everything, but they don't. And then book 2 would be in sort of like her 20s, where she's kind of getting over a lot of that adolescence, a lot of the anger and everything, but she doesn't know where she fits in the world. This was part of why my first attempt at book 2 went completely wrong, because I had this idea in my head that she's trying to find her place in the world in book 2. She doesn't know where she fits. And I think I leaned a bit too heavily into that, and she became very unfocused and passive, not knowing what she wanted, which was not Eska at all, basically. So when I rewrote it, I gave her a lot more agency. She still doesn't know where she fits in the world, but she's much more determined to try and find her place, where she fits, her home and her family, basically. And then book 3, I was more in sort of the idea of, okay, she's in her 30s sort of type thing, where she's a lot more sure of who she is and what she wants out of life, and she's determined to go and get it. So she has a lot of agency in book 3, and she is very determined, and quite often to the detriment of herself and everyone around her. And then book 4 and 5, I had a similar sort of idea, but I'm not going to go into that for spoilery reasons. But there was this idea that each book was basically, it's kind of like a different part of her life, a different decade of her life, because the entire series is about Eska telling her life story. So she's telling her life throughout the decades of it, and she's had however many years, 50, 60 years on the earth, on the planet, so she's got a lot to say.
He definitely does. Talking about the first 3 books on the you bring the third book, which kind of brings like it actually is a very nice fitting end as well. So for readers who might, all the readers who think about, uncompleted series, I don't want to start an uncompleted series, you can actually read the first 3 books out. Well, the first 4 books are out, but you can read the first 3 books out. The ending of the third book, From Cold Ashes, actually brings to a fitting end, to a conclusion, so as to speak, to Eska's journey. And if you wanted to stop over there, you could, and you could, possibly have a happy ending, so as to speak. Rob, how did you craft that? Because again, knowing that when you started out, it was a 5-book series, but yet you ended it so beautifully that it was like almost like a fitting end to the trilogy, and people literally could stop, and you could even walk away from that knowing that the story has ended, so as to speak, and people could be happy.
There's so when I was writing book 1, my book 1's very much a sort of discovery for me. I'm very much a pantser, and I usually have a few sort of like ideas and characters and a beginning, a middle, and possibly an end. But book 1s are very much a sort of exploration for me. And when I was writing book 1, I put in a lot of these future hints, basically. and of her life. And then when I was getting towards the end, when I was writing book 3, I think it was like I must have been about halfway through book 3, and I went, well, I'm not going to cover everything that I've hinted at. I haven't got a chance. So there's no chance I'm going to wrap this up in a trilogy. So at that point, I was like, well, then there's going to be more books, but I didn't want to write it as this sort of like, okay, I wanted to write it originally as sort of a trilogy and then a duology. When I had that sense in mind, there was going to be more books, so I thought I'll write it as a trilogy and a duology. So I wrote the first 3 books in the end, and then I knew, right, there's going to be 2 more. But then somewhere along the line, I decided that they will still sit as a trilogy and a duology if you want them that way. I didn't want to collect them into 2 different series. I wanted to collect them into one series, because they are all still part of Eska's life, and they are all still part of The War Eternal, which is a series name which ties into the themes throughout the entire 5 books, not just the first 3, basically. So that was basically it. When I realized there was going to be more than 3 books, I decided to set it as a trilogy and a duology. So it was quite easy in that way to collect them into, okay, well, I'm getting to the end of book 3 here, so it is going to be almost like an end to the trilogy, because it is, but there are going to be 2 more books. And I maybe didn't make that clear enough when I released the first 3 books, because I know a lot of people didn't realize there were 2 more books coming. But yeah, so I probably should have made it a little bit clearer that there were going to be 2 more books. But yeah, so it definitely, at the end of the trilogy, you get this idea that, yeah, you can stop here. You can, but there are 2 more books. There is more of Eska's life to tell. And as the title of the 4th book would probably spoil a little bit, the 4th book being Sins of the Mother, the follow-up duology kind of deals a lot more with Eska's children, because that's a whole thing. Eska has children.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel Eska's children, and I'm not going to say who they could be characters in their own story, and I would want to read them. Not just the one which is kind of focused on in Sins of the Mother, but the whom we meet at the end of From Cold Ashes Risen are also very intriguing characters, and you kind of do focus on that in Sins of the Mother. So, but that'll be spoiler talk. So I'm not gonna talk about that because I don't want to.
It's tough, isn't it? It's tough talking about later books in the series without spoilers.
It is.
The series is 5 books long, and you're like, dear God, I want to talk about this character, but I can't because they're not even introduced until book 4.
Yes, and the one character which gets introduced in book 4 is my favorite character of this entire series. Like, I love this character more than Eskara Helsing, and I cannot mention them. I cannot talk about them. So yes, we cannot do that. But maybe next year, maybe when the book is at least the 5th book is out for maybe 1 year plus, I can get you back to kind of talk more about like
do a full spoiler episode.
Yes, the secrets of this world, because there's a lot of them. Let's switching back again to this trilogy and how you release it. You did what is known as a rapid release. I believe you were influenced by Ben Galley about this. What perhaps was a very weird coincidence was that you also did a rapid release just as the pandemic was beginning. I want to get a sense from you of how this affected your anxiety, because of course the world was changing as we knew it. You were doing a rapid release for the first time in your life as an indie author. That is stressful enough. On top of that, you're coming out with this new series where the first book, as you said, had an abrasive character. People might not like it. You were still apprehensive about it all. And then, of course, COVID happened. Can you perhaps recount for readers like how all this unfolded as you were kind of preparing for it?
Now, first off, technically, it's not my only rapid release. Because when I first released my debut trilogy, I just released the entire trilogy on one day because I'd already written the damn thing. So I just thought, I don't know, all 3 books on one day. Why not? Admittedly, this was 10 years ago and I had no idea what I was doing. But no, yes, with the first 3 books in The War Eternal, I'd been speaking to Ben Galley, and he did a rapid release with, I think it was the Chasing Graves trilogy, wasn't it? And he said it did really well to help boost the visibility of the series, basically. Because there's a whole thing about new releases and Amazon algorithms anyway. But yeah, so it helps boost the visibility of the series. So I thought I'll give it a go, especially as I just so happen to have an entire trilogy written. Because by this point, by the time I'd been speaking to him, the first 3 books in the War Eternal were written and were just sat on my computer collecting dust because I was far too scared to let anybody else see them. So yeah, I decided to do it, and I was absolutely terrified. Partly because, yeah, rapid release again, releasing the books 1 month apart. Is it going to work? Is it not? Who knows? Partly because Eska is such a problematic character, and I had absolutely no idea how people were going to react to her, to be honest. It's why she sat collecting dust on my computer for so long, because I was so damn scared of letting anybody else see her, because I just thought everybody's going to hate her because she's such a horrible character, but also such a nice character. Luckily, alpha readers and my editor were just like, no, she's actually a really good character. She's complicated, but she's really good, and the series is good, so I released it. So I did. But it was nerve-wracking. It was nerve-wracking to release her. It was nerve-wracking to do a rapid release. And yeah, with COVID hitting, I was like, okay, how is COVID going to affect the industry, the state of it? Because there was a lot of people saying like, well, nobody's going to buy books anymore because people can't afford to. Everybody's tightening the belts. So I thought, oh, great. Yeah, this series is probably just going to bomb and sell no copies whatsoever. Luckily, COVID actually had a bit of an opposite effect in that lockdown had just hit, so everybody had nothing else to do, so people were buying shed loads of books. So it turned out that was talked a lot there. It turned out quite a good way to do things. The rapid release does actually work as a way of boosting visibility, because the way it's sort of done when you release a book, and then it has like a month's visibility boost from just being a new release, and then when book 2 releases, it helps boost the visibility of book 1, and then book 3 releases, and again it boosts the visibility of book 1. So basically, instead of having a month of this boosted visibility, you get 3 months of this boosted visibility. So that really does help as a way to just sort of like push the book out there a bit more. And I think after the first month and a half of the release of book 1, my anxiety started to drop, because I could see that it was doing really well, and I could see how people were reacting to Eska, and mostly they were reacting favorably, which was good. There were still people who absolutely hated her, and that was hard to take. But as with any sort of negative reviews, you have to take the good with the bad and try not to let the bad knock you down too much. So yeah, it worked out well, but it was nerve-wracking, and I would both recommend it and not recommend doing it. So
that was going to be my question. Would you recommend it to authors, especially?
Yes, and also no.
Okay, let's break it down this way. Why would you recommend it? What are the reasons for which you would recommend it for, besides the Amazon boosting, the 1 month boost, which kind of keeps happening consecutively? Besides that, are there any other reasons from a reader perspective, you think?
From a reader perspective, yes. I think that there is a whole thing where there are a lot of readers these days, thanks to a couple of bad eggs, who will not start a series unless it is finished. They like to give the reason because, oh, well, it might never be finished, which, for 90% of the series out there is bollocks. But hey, bad eggs. So there is that sort of sense of there are going to be readers who will not pick up a series until it's finished. There's also the fact that a lot of readers like to just binge series. They don't want to wait, a year between the next one. So if they're saying, oh, wow, this series is releasing 1 a month, yeah, sure, let's jump on it. So I think it definitely helps, that sort of sense. However, it's, and if you can do it, it's a good thing. However, I know a lot of authors, they can't. They don't write an entire series before releasing any. It's how I used to work. I've not been working that way recently. And I actually prefer working that way, because for me, it means that once I've written the entire series, I can, once I've written book 3, I can then go back into book 1 and either change things or maybe add things to sort of like foreshadow bits in book 3 a bit better. So it's a good way of giving you this sort of like level of, well, it makes it look like I had the entire thing planned all along. Which for pantsers like me is good, because we did not have the entire thing planned all along. It all just kind of came together at the end. So yeah, I think I would certainly recommend it if you can do it, and if you don't mind the stress of 3 months of releases, because it will help boost your visibility, and it may get you some readers who would otherwise not touch the series until it's complete and all that lot. However, I would also not recommend it because it is stressful as hell, and as I say, you have to have the entire trilogy already written, which for I think most authors, they probably don't work fast enough to do that without spending 5 years on a series before releasing any books. I know some people who can do it. I know some people who are like, yeah, I can write 500,000 words in a year, easy.
We are not all Andy Peloquin, so can't say anything about that.
Phil Tucker, I think
Yes.
Phil Tucker wrote like 500,000 words in like the first half of this year, and I'm just sat there going, "You're a machine." They're not even bad words; they're good words.
Yes. Fun fact about Phil Tucker: I was lucky enough to meet him just earlier this year, thanks to Dirk Ashton at Dragon Con. They, these writers, Dirk, Phil, Davis Ashura, and Bryce O'Connor, they would just before heading out to Dragon Con, they would just do like for an hour or so, they would do a writing session. All of them would just quiet sitting writing in. And most of them would get some writing works done, and those were just words. They're not good words. And Phil would basically be knocking out chapters. He'd be like, okay, that's one chapter done, all good to go. And it was tremendous to watch, but also awe-inspiring in many ways. The fact
it's amazing the number of times I get people saying, you release like 2 books a year, you're prolific, and I'm just sat there going, I'm really not. I know other authors who would count as prolific, and I'm pointing at like Phil and the likes, going, no, that's prolific. Me, I'm kind of like so.
Well, I think the perception of you being so prolific, Rob, besides, like you mentioned, like 17, 18 books in the last 9, 10 years, but you often, like you write at a solidly good pace. But then when you release them, they come out really in chunks, so as to speak, or, at least appear to be in like the same year, or with this rapid release, literally within 3 months. So it definitely creates an impression on the readers that, oh yeah, this writer is fast and he's keep putting out books. Also, your past bibliography, you can go anywhere and look, oh, there's a lot of books. Plus, I love that chart which you have put up, where it's like, if you want to start with this series, here's why you should start with this series. If you want to start with this series, here's why you should. So that is pretty cool.
Lots of different things. Do you want some sci-fi? You can go there. Do you want some epic fantasy? Go there. Do you want some grimdark? There. Do you want yeah. I know it's I've written quite a lot. I've released 18 books, and I've been doing this for 9.5 years or something. I've written more books than that, but I've not written that many more than a lot of authors, to be honest. If I look at even traditionally published authors, I believe Mark Lawrence has been going just a couple of years longer than me or something like that, and he's written more books than I have. So even Mark is more prolific than me.
Mark also has the advantage of doing 3 books only. Like, he always prefers trilogies. Like, all of his series so far, even though some have been set in the same world, they are 3 like trilogies and trilogies only. So of course it works for him, and readers also love that as well. So yes, Mark but he had a 2-year publishing start than you, but he also had maybe more than that, when he was writing all of those books. Because I think similar to you, he also prefers to write all 3 books out and then release them, get them released at a 1 year's timeline, which of course his publishers love.
Yeah, to be honest, it's certainly the way that I love doing it. And it's the way I want to get back to doing it. The problem is you kind of need to have a backlog. I screwed myself up doing it with The War Eternal, because I did this rapid release, and then suddenly I'm like, oh, I don't have any more books to release. Shit. So with the idea of, okay, I want to keep releasing at least 1 book, maybe 2 books a year, suddenly I'm having to release them as I'm writing them. So hopefully I'm going to get back to the point where I can just be like, right, I'm going to write this trilogy, and then I will release it. Probably, maybe not rapid release, but over the course of, I don't know, a year and a half, and it'll give me time to write the next trilogy. We'll see how that goes.
Yes, and for our viewers, the trilogy which he's speaking about is perhaps, in my opinion, his best work so far. So when he announces it, when you get to hear of it, you will find out why I and all the other alpha readers are equally excited about him releasing that. So, and all I can say is angels. Just keep that in mind, angels, and your mind will be blown.
That's coming 2024.
2024,
Maybe,
yes.
hopefully, we'll see.
We'll see. Hey, I have gotten to read the first book, so I count myself lucky. I'm not going to complain about it. 2024 is good. Gives me more time to reread that. Let's switch a bit, from like these first three books, and then let's talk about Sins of the Mother. You released Sins of the Mother, I think, in 2022, because 2021 you had the two Mortal Techniques release books out, and then
earlier this year, it was May something, I think.
I don't think so, but it seems so far away, right? Like Onion, I don't like. It somehow doesn't feel like it was earlier this year. And I reviewed it, and I read it, and I loved it. It is perhaps my favorite book of all amidst all the series. Of course, granted that I hadn't read book 5 until then, but I loved Sins of the Mother. I loved Sins of the Mother for two reasons. One, it introduced my favorite character, of whom I cannot speak about. Two, it gave a whole fresh new spin on the series. You had Eskara again narrating her life, but then you also had Eskara in a very different mental, physical stage. And then you did this very fascinating thing, because this series, had mysteries so far laced throughout. In each book, you're given a new mystery and she finds out what happens. In this fourth book as well, there's a very world-spanning, intriguing mystery as well, which you kind of get faced with. Well, given you're a pantser, how did this come about? Did you develop it as you're writing the fourth book, or did you have an inkling of this as what you're going to be focusing on before you started writing the fourth book?
Yeah, I mean, being a pantser and writing a long series is a weird sort of thing. So as the series goes on, as each sort of like book goes on, I get more and more. There's more and more planning involved in it, basically. So when I came to write book 4 and 5, I had a much better idea of what was going into each book. Basically, I kind of knew I knew most of what was happening in book 4 and a lot of what I was going to do in book 5. I mean, that's why literally the prologue to book 4 is a scene at the end of book 5. It's weird. It works. Don't worry, it works. But yeah, so I by the time I got that far, I had a lot better idea of what was going on and the mystery that was going to be surrounding book 4. Because yeah, there is kind of well, it's not a mystery. It's not like a whodunit or anything, but there is a mystery in each book, which gets solved as the book goes on, and it's kind of like a world building mystery. It's like, okay, in book 2, it's like what are the Rand and the Jinn, and all sorts. So yeah, with the mystery in book 4, when I was going into it, I knew it. I already knew it. So there was a hell of a lot of planning that went involved in that one. And yeah, so writing a longer series is tough, but at the same time, it's kind of easier because you have this extra level of planning, because you know so much that's come before, and by this point you probably know a lot of what's going to be happening, and there's so much world building already done, there's so much that the characters already built, that a lot of it is already there to draw from. But at the same time, you have to stop adding random shit in and start pulling it all together.
You do a fantastic job of that, because you have seeded the world with so many things in the first 3 books. Like, that, of course, there were questions for me as well. Like, why is there an eye in the sky? Why are there 2 moons? Who are the Rand and Jinn? Of course, you gave us answers, but in book 4, you really pulled them in. And that's one thing which I do want to highlight for the readers and the viewers of this, is that it's not just there for show. It is there for a reason. And by book 4 and 5, you truly find out how cruel this man is and how brilliant his world building skills are. Cruel because his characters have to go through a lot of stuff for that. Brilliant because you will truly see the depths of how this world has been built and why everything exists, and it's there for a reason as well.
It's hyperbole. It was all built on the fly. I managed to couple it together with duct tape.
I and all the other alpha readers would heavily disagree with you on that, Rob. But I will let the readers decide about that. Talking again, I'm going to shift a little bit from the world building and a little bit more from towards the character aspect of things. Because this heavily book, all throughout, you only and only get Eskara's viewpoint. She is such a fantastic character that she kind of commands your attention. But besides her, you have other side characters, Joseph, and others. There's the two brothers. There's, I don't again spoiler, so I can't mention him. But there's a slightly mad character who will really fascinate you. He's found in book 1, and then his role keeps on changing towards books 2 and 3. And
also not a he.
not yeah. Oh. Two.
Yeah, everybody right. I'm just going to say the name Sarakis. Everybody calls Sarakis a he.
Oh no, I was referring to Tamura. I was not.
Right, Tamura. Yeah, no, you can say Tamura. Tamura's nuts.
No, yeah,
he is he.
So I'm not talking about Sarakis. I'm talking about Tamura because Tamura also plays a crucial part. But nevertheless, it's given with Sins of the Mother. The title itself is kind of not a spoiler, but it kind of leans towards what the book is about. Making or writing Eskara's children and making them distinct characters on their own. Again, how tricky or how did you go about that? How did you approach that? Because again, I'm not, you don't need to name any of the characters, but just they are all distinct personalities. They all have life experiences which have shaped them the way to be they are. And again, I apologize for because this question is going to be tricky with regards to spoilers. How did you make them distinct enough from Eskara, and how hard was it, just from a writer's perspective?
I think it was actually quite easy to make them very distinctive from Eska, because Eska is such a sort of like strong, almost domineering personality. I found it quite easy to sort of like figure out, okay, how would her kids be? How would her children be when they sort of are those who have grown up in her presence and those who haven't grown up in her presence, basically. So I don't know. It was very easy to be quite distinctive with them from Eska, especially as God, it is hard talking about them without spoilers. Especially as I mean, I have mentioned her earlier in the episode. So Cyrillith, she has a very, very distinctive personality because I didn't want her to be sort of she's not neurotypical as I believe the current terminology is. She has quite a lot of verbal tics, basically, and a lot of those make it quite easy to express personality through them. So yeah, but as for just differentiating them from Eska, I just thought it was incredibly easy, to be honest. It kind of came naturally, and I think that's partly because of how strong a character Eska has always been in my mind. Mm-hmm. So yeah, her children were also strong, but for different reasons altogether.
Would you ever consider writing a book or a story from Cyrillith's perspective of these events or of something else? Or is this chapter closed on after the ending of The Death's Beating Heart?
I mean, I never say never, to be honest, but there's no plans to at the moment.
Okay, that's fair. That's perfectly fair. Readers, when you read books 4 and 5, you'll understand this question a little bit more and a little bit why as to Cyrillith is so fascinating. Talking about this is probably going to be I'm going to try to end this series of questions about the war tunnel because again I cannot talk about spoilers.
To be honest, I've only got another sort of like 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Talking about the war eternal, with this book ending and with Death's Beating Heart coming out next week as well, what can, or if you had to pitch it to readers, like, and of course this is book 5, so you have to read books 1 to 4, you can't just jump into books 5, but like how would you pitch them this entire series? Like what would be the highlight of the series besides epic high fantasy?
I'd say it's sort of like, yeah, it's a dark epic fantasy that's set around a young woman's life and how she became known as the Corpse Queen, which is, it's a title she she has earned. And this is sort of how she earned it. This is her rise, this is her fall, and this is how she affected the world in both good and bad ways. She broke it, she fixed it, she maybe broke it again, who knows. So yeah, if you want a sort of a first person dark epic fantasy about a young woman who just refuses to be broken and who has broken the world, this is probably for you.
That is a wonderful summation, Rob. Before I let you go, I just want to ask you, do you want to get, are there any books that have, you are a voracious reader and you do read a lot from self-published and traditional published fantasy as well. So are there any particular books recently that have caught your eye or caught your imagination, so to speak, or you want to give a shout out to?
Oh, I'm always finding loads to read. So recently, let's be well, I recently re-listened to the Locked Tomb series, starting with Gideon the Ninth. And if you haven't listened or read those, I definitely recommend them, because they are honestly, they're especially Gideon the Ninth has one of the most powerfully compelling, freshest voices in fantasy ever, at least for the last sort of decade or so. What else? I recently listened to Wistful Ascending by JCM Byrne, which was really good. It was not what I was expecting at all. It's sort of like what happens if a superhero was on a space station, but it had a lot of heart to it, and I really enjoyed that one, to be honest. And then what else did I read recently? Oh, I recently read The Keep Within by is it J.L. Warrad? Yeah, it's J.L. Warrad, which is an arc. I got given it. I like getting arcs, they're fun. Which is like a grim, dark, political thrillery type thing with lots of schemes and plots and debauchery. That was a hell of a lot of fun. And also mustard. Weird. So yeah, those that's kind of what I've been reading and listening to recently, to be honest.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I'll try to mention those books listed below. And is it the Penny Blade book which you're referring to by J.L. Warren, or is it sequel to it?
No, that's been out for a while. His next one coming out next year is The Keep Within.
Oh, The Keep Within. Okay, I will try to find the link to that and we'll post that as well. Rob, thank you as always for your time and for talking to me and for, of course, revealing all of these wonderful things. I'll be listing Rob's, I have an extensive list of his reviews, so I'll be listing all of them, but I'll be listing Rob's, website, his Twitter feed, everywhere you can find and hound him. So
on my website, check out my blog, which lists the upcoming self-published releases for each month, because other self-published authors need your eyes as well. Go give them your eyes.
Yes, and money as well, because they need that too to keep on writing. And there are some lovely books in this upcoming releases. I, for one, definitely check them out. So, Rob, thank you so much again. And any parting words for our viewers and listeners?
Thank you for reading, for listening, and yeah, that's about it, I think.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. Bye, everybody.